And we are good. So just to recap some things, obviously we've gone over a lot in just the amount of nearly 2 weeks. Talking about 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, obviously some different ways we can make surfaces and different modeling situations. But today, oh man, we talked about unrolling surfaces and getting them ready for whether you're printing and using it as a template, and vice versa. We could use it actually as the laser cutter pieces themselves, as long as they're the right size. We went over how to get into Illustrator, all those things. So again, if you're watching this video and you didn't hear any of that, obviously it's in part 1, 2, and 3. However, for part 4 today, I wanted to expand and again tie it with a nice bow if you had any further questions. However, one of the first things I wanted to show that's super simple today is that yes, you can just trace yourself. So in my case, I just typed in picture and put that in there. I'll take everything and of course trim it down until just about, I can get what just I need. In my case, I'm going to take a polyline because it's not super important. I know that this piece is going to get pretty small, so I'm not going to necessarily need curvilinear lines just to get the point across. In fact, it might actually even be a little bit stronger if I make it a little bit more edgy, right? So for instance, kind of like this. I think it actually looks a little bit more human when it is kind of edgy like that. To be fair, if you have a Wacom screen, I can totally let you borrow the pen and you can totally just trace this on the screen. It's actually a fantastic and very therapeutic way of tracing things. However, I had to get you started somewhere, because don't get me wrong, we do have to start with a mouse and a pointer from 1982 that, yes, a lot of people don't understand that the mouse and the ballpoint mouse was invented by Apple. Steve Jobs literally came up with the mouse that we use today. Now, unfortunately, it hasn't changed in like 35 years, arguably more. But we do need to trace the entire thing, and as you can see, not too shabby. Another plugin that you can use that I'll just say for the audience, I won't necessarily install it or use it today, but it's called Vectorize. And you can essentially take any image, and very similar to image trace, and I'll show you a little bit of that today. You can make a vector tracing, if you will, fairly close to a rasterized image, which is, of course, what we're actually tracing here. But in my case, I want to get pretty close. I guess I don't really have to be such a perfectionist today. Man, I didn't realize my shirt came out that much anyway. But yeah, I can get a lower resolution, if you will. Doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, probably just because I know I want the feet to end flat, I'll go like that. Let's fake it till I make it though. I think most of us can see for the gist of things what I'm doing here is clearly just tracing the outline and the form of the body. Chop off my hair. It's looking a little bowlish like today. Going through the awkward phase of obviously growing my hair out again. So there's that. But once you're finished, of course, you can move that out of the way. And honestly, a pretty clever way of adding some personality to your drawings, right? I mean, what better than to have literally you, your friends, your studio mates as a scale figure. In fact, we used to do this at Texas Tech as like a project, and very often we'd share with everybody's little tracing, and we'd put everybody else in our projects, right? And it was always really, a very interesting way, especially for outside reviewers to go, wow, look at such a family kind of atmosphere, such a studio culture that's being represented. And often we got better comments because, look, I mean, they're going kind of outside the box in that regard. However, once you have it from here, I think it's pretty obvious. We could just laser cut that. I mean, not a big deal. It is pretty small. And I would want to verify just how big this is at a certain scale. So for instance, if it was 1/4 scale, how big would a 6-foot person be? 1.5 inches. Thank you. Yeah. And as you can see, it is super tiny, right, to say the very least. Now, I could keep things 1-to-1 and go with like a, in my case, 6 feet. So I could just type in 6 feet. And still, that's actually pretty small. But what's nice about this is I literally only have to do it once. I could keep this forever. In fact, you could slowly do this over time, and you'd probably notice that you're slowly getting shorter, just becoming an old man or so, or old woman. But yeah, that's a little too tall. Let's shorten that up just a bit. Not too shabby, maybe a little bit taller. Of course, holding shift. And again, I would do the same thing with my rectangle. Oh wait, I've already got some, don't I? There's that piece I needed at 1/8 scale. So I would literally just take the same bounding box, because that box is already to scale with my laser cutter. And there we go. And we're totally gonna go cut that out today if we can with the laser cutter. However, if I wanted to make it a 3-dimensional model, there's a couple things I could do. Now, clearly, I want to make a copy. And unfortunately, with the three-dimensional model, it really does have to be the exact size that you want it, not necessarily the exact size that it is in digital space. Remember, in digital space, things are 1-to-1. So if I type in 5 feet, it's 5 feet in the digital realm. However, we know that a scale model isn't going to actually be 5 feet large. In fact, that would be ridiculous, right? Here's my scale figure, sir. It's the size of you, right? It'd be ridiculous. So in our case, we can use, for a 2-dimensional method, such as a laser cutter, we can use the box method. However, if we'd like to make a 3-dimensional model, the first thing we need to do is, of course, make it 3-dimensional. So in my case, zooming in on what this is, and really relatively to give it some thickness. So in my case, I can extrude it first, and more or less give it some thickness. Not too shabby. Another thing that I could start to employ is giving it some sort of variability. Now, depending on what the person's actually doing, more or less, keep in mind these are like this big. So any 3-dimensionality, it kind of just looks like 3-dimensionality. However, once you do something like this, it does look a little boxy, right, to say the very least. So one thing that we can do is chamfered edges, or we can fillet edges. Chamfer might actually work better, but in our case, let's try it out. So I'm going to take all my edges, and I don't want to sit there and get all of them. So, oh, I accidentally got the bottom ones. Let's try that again. Let's be a little bit more specific. Ooh, there we go. Just the top layer. There we go. Not too shabby, but that really long line tells me that it's not going to work. In fact, if I hit enter, I don't think anything will happen. So in my case, the radius, I'm going to select 0.05. I mean, just take a stab at it, guess, if you will. However, it's not going to do anything, and it's going to still stick at 1, and clearly it's not going to work. I've exploded. Anyway, sometimes I do these things on purpose so that you can see what not to do, or something that you might run into, right? In my case, using 1 foot radius, that wasn't going to work. Clearly, the radius is too big. And as you guys saw, I was trying to put in 0.01. Well, when you enact it again, for some reason, those kind of continue. So for instance, check this out. I'll select that again. And now they're all at 0.01 like I wanted. You see what I mean? It's kind of weird. Or 0.05. I'll hit enter this time. Try again. A little bit better. A little bit better. And really, it's kind of there's kind of a piece there. You guys see it? So it's still kind of a little too big. Let's try again. But definitely less. I definitely look less exploded. So let's try that again. And in my case, change this first. So I'm going to change it to what's smaller? 0.04. Let's go 0.03. Go big or go home, right? So let's take all of those pieces. Ooh. And again, I'm just trying to get that top layer. It can be a little tricky like that. Sweet. Enter. Enter again. Not too shabby. They really should do it all at once, but it looks like some of the corners are actually pretty harsh. That's okay. Another thing that we can do is go with the ones that work. So in my case, you could actually isolate the ones that aren't working and just delete them. But I should be able, oh man, it didn't even make it. So it just left it as a surface. Again, kind of because of the tracing that I did. So scratch that. It doesn't look like fillet or chamfered edge is at least going to work for us today. Although we haven't tried chamfer. Let me try transfer as well. Transfer is less radii. It's more of like a straight edge. So chamfer edge. I don't think I did chamfer edge for you guys yet. I think we did fillet. Just keep in mind, fillet is based on a radius, whereas chamfer is based on just a line. So in my case, again, trying to get that top layer. Sweet, way too big though. Actually, I kind of want to see if that does anything. But in my case, I know it's definitely going to be much smaller. So 0.01, see what it does. Oh my God. It's actually kind of cool in itself. I mean, that would be like such an interesting roof, if you will. Let's try it again. There we go. Now it's at the 0.01. Yeah, that kind of worked. So we get a little bit in there. You know, it still didn't really work. And it could just be because of the complex edge or shape that it is. Another thing that we could do is called box edit, which is pretty interesting in itself. Now, I don't know how well it's going to work, at least in this situation, but let's try it out. And let's start off with a, I don't know. Let's just apply. There we go. And essentially what this does is creates essentially a wire mesh grid around any three-dimensional object. In my case, I might want to accidentally, before I get too far ahead of myself, undo that chamfer that I just did. Otherwise, I don't know what, honestly, box edit's going to do to that. So, again, typing the object and going to box edit, or, yeah, box edit. Now we need to basically decide what kind of pieces we want around this. So in my case, things have changed a little bit, but that's okay. Scale 1 to 1 to 1, uniform. Size is correct. We'll keep it uniform. That should be okay there. Oh, is it too complex for box edit as well? Oh. Perhaps I did not have it closed, but it wouldn't have made an object if it wasn't. What else can we do to make this more curvilinear? Oh, I know. I'll just make it more curvilinear. Where's my character? Where am I? You can always select the object itself. You can always go to the viewport that you want to find it. And again, zoom selected. There it is. So in my case, I'm really just trying to make it a little curvilinear or a little bit more human-like. So in my case, I'm going to just draw my own wire cut. Maybe there's kind of my belly. Kind of rounded. Rounds off maybe towards the arms. And fair enough. Oh no, it's way out there. What happens? What do I do if that happens, guys? Take the view that you drew it on, make 2D, and just flatten it out. You don't have to start over or anything. There's the one that I took, and there's the make 2D line that I want. Sweet. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to get lost in these things, so be careful. But I just want to give it a little bit of pizzazz, if you will, right? So I'm going to rotate that. And basically just wire cut it. So give myself a little bit of a belly. And give it a little bit of a three-dimensionality. So in my case, wire cut this object all the way through and all the way through the top. So if you take a look, and we get rid of that one, and that one, and it gives it a little bit more three-dimensionality. Not too shabby. My head could be a little more less flat. But as you can see, I can start to shape and cut away. All right, so for instance, I could take this piece. You can also control the angle that it cuts and really get the backside too. So maybe let's get the backside a little bit. wire cut object. Oh. There we go. Maybe I spelled wire cut wrong. It happens to me a lot, actually. There we go. Straight through, straight out. Chopping it up a little bit. Not my best scale figure, but it's not the end of the world either. To be fair, we're looking at the largest way that we're ever going to see it. Realistically, it's much more like that big, right? Even compared to, I mean, even that's pretty big, and it's still pretty small, right? So keep that in mind. You know, often we're going for these extremely awesome detailed things, and if you've ever looked at something under a microscope, you know that it's like, whoa, it's not as perfect as it looks. Or if you've ever looked at like a signature or like ink on paper underneath a microscope, it's actually quite beautiful and crazy. But kind of the same principle, at least here, especially in AutoCAD and especially in Rhinoceros. However, if we wanted to 3D print this, what I couldn't do is 3D print a poly surface. So when you click on this and you type in what, you'll see that it is of course a valid poly surface, and that's great, but I can't 3D print it yet. So in my case, I'll make a copy, and I need to turn it into a mesh. Like I said, 3D printing is not actually too hard, but there's just a couple of things to memorize. The first one being that mesh is the only file type or file category that 3D printers print, right? So mesh is the family of geometry. It means that there's only made out of triangles. And in fact, it was a really great way in the 80s to make video games. Why? Because instead of calculating a bunch of squares and triangles, the computer only had to calculate triangles. That's why you see WWE in 1990. Anybody play Super Nintendo? And we thought the graphics were so great, and the triangle head is like hilarious. Anyway, there's a reason why they were all triangles, and it's because it was easier for the CPUs at the time to read them. But in our case, now it's been simplified. I can just type in mesh, enter, and actually even control its complexity. So fewer polygons in this case, or more polygons in this case. I'll leave it right in the middle and press apply. For the most part, you should see it actually turn into a bunch of triangles, right? To say the very least. From here, you can actually shape it even more. So for instance, if I do F10, I can shape it a lot. In fact, I can take each point and move it as much as necessary. Now keep in mind, that's not an easy task, right? But you can still shape these things quite nicely. To be fair, I mean, dang, that's already looking like some sort of crazy roof or like a building in itself, and that's just my body. But not too shabby. And like I said, we'll laser cut the actual size to this. So again, I want to make that mesh first, but once I have it done, and I can scale it down. So I need to scale it down into millimeters. So honestly, the best thing I can do in a situation like this where I have a lot of stuff is actually make a new file. So in my case, I'm going to start a new file, and I'm going to make sure it's in millimeters. After all, millimeters is definitely what is usually the default and what a 3D printer wants. In my case, I've actually never tried this. I want to see if this actually works. Let's see if I can just drag this into the other one. I don't think you can, but it's worth a shot. No, it totally doesn't work. Let's try it this way. Actually, I do think this works. So if you copy something, or Control C. So let's take that guy. Control C and Control V. I think it's there. Maybe? Let's find out. Survey says it's there. So yeah, Control V. Definitely one way to do it. See where we're at. Let's see where we're at. Where are we? Space, space, space. However, it's not entirely imperative that we have it at the 0, 0 point. Then again, we can always move our 0, 0 point. Just always remember that, guys. Your seaplane, you can move it. All you got to do is type in world, right, and click on something, right? In my case, I'm going to set the top view to there, right? Oh, and it would help if I was actually in a top view. There we go. Man, let's try that again. Seaplane, come back. World. Top. Where are you? However, if you just absolutely could not find your seaplane, just throw away the computer, burn it. No, I'm just kidding. Just absolutely give up. Actually, it might be really, really small, and I'm just not seeing it in there. Hold on. I forgot. It might be in there. Ooh. Just because this is so big, we just took it from feet to inches. So actually, here's a better way. Let's not maybe be so fancy with the copy and paste here. In my case, I don't need to save that one. But let's take this one and just export it. So in my case, I'm going to take a copy of that one and put it close to the 0, point. Not imperative that it is or isn't. So we'll take that one. Again, file export selected. And we'll just put it on the desktop for today. We'll call it test 3D print. And I'll bring this print in on Friday. But in our case, let's save it as a Rhino 8 file. We do need to turn it into millimeters, and I don't want to necessarily take everything else and turn it into millimeters. So, how big is 6 feet at 1/4 scale? 1.5 inches. What about 1/8 scale? Super tiny. Right? What is, it would be 6/8, right? What is 6/8? 3/4 of an inch. Thank you. Thank you. Right. So all we really need to do is take this little scale figure and turn it into that size. To be honest, I'm kind of overdoing it. What I'm trying to do is basically just make another file and make sure you change the units. No big deal. You don't even have to change anything because it's already 6 feet. Therefore, it's going to turn it into 6 something, right? So sometimes you can do it that way as well. However, we can also just make it really small in comparison to everything else. However, be careful. Like you're seeing, I'm about to make something very small when everything is very big. We just drew entire sized buildings like Center Pompidou. So we have a very large file going on here. So I definitely want to kind of isolate and make sure that, I know where I'm drawing it or how small it's going to get. Because, well, I need that measurement. So 0.75 of an inch. And as you can see, I need to make my model that small. So let's do it. But relatively speaking, I know I was trying to show kind of too many things at once, but you don't necessarily have to switch or jump files, right? All we really need is, of course, to make that the same size as that little guy right there. So we can use gumball, or we could reset our gumball. Actually, my top view doesn't look like my top view. Let's see. There we go. Thought so. Something was slightly off. There we go. So let's rotate this guy. Boop. Didn't realize how tiny I was. But yeah, just holding shift and fake it till I make it. After all, it's a scale figure. Nobody's going to go in there and be like, well, how tall is it? But you'll know, so that's definitely important too. But not too shabby. Another thing I could do is just scale the piece itself, right? Scale, take a base point, take a point that I want, and make it the exact size too. So again, 6 foot scale figure, and as you can see, that is the actual size, at least at 1/8 scale. We could do the same thing for, well, 1/4 scale, which would be 1.5 inches. So again, I can make another copy. I could even base it off of that same line and scale it again. Boop. Looks kind of funny when you kind of look at them together. But now I can take this piece and I can save it essentially as an STL file. Now that's pretty simple if I just take this file and just file export it as one. However, I don't know if this is a valid mesh or not, and I need to verify. So in my case, I can type in mesh repair and check. This is a bad mesh. Oh no. What do I do? Well, I can try to repair it. So in my case, repair mesh. Next. Show all edges. Done. And this is our little window, if you will. To be fair, you can't really see what it's fixing, and to be fair, I don't think it's fixed much. All right, so I don't know. That's really lost the value or the shape that I want to have. So maybe mesh repair from Rhino is definitely, I see Dove's just shaking her head like, no way, that doesn't look like me anymore at all. And again, I kind of do that on purpose because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So edit undo. Right, and keep that back. Let's kind of recenter that. There we go. But that's definitely looking much more appropriate. So even though it's a bad mesh, what do we do to fix it? Well, we can use sources outside of the internet or outside of Rhinoceros, such as free STL fixer. I don't think it's .com, but it should be. In our case, we'll export selected, and we'll turn it into an STL file. Another reason why Rhino is so great is because look at all these different ways that we can export these file types. And there it is, STL, stereolithography file. So make sure that you check on that. Go to options and make sure that you select binary. Why? Well, it's just small file size. So we'll hit export. We'll put in a spot where we can find it. Model to fix. So we'll save that. And as you can see, it's always just a little bit smaller when it's binary. So export. And let's go to the STL fixer. So in our case. Also there's Thingiverse, which is a really great resource as well. But if you go to Formware, you could take a screenshot of this per se. Also, if you just type in STL file fixer free, it's typically the first one. Again, Formware as in software, but Formware. So if you click on that, we can actually put our STL file in there and it'll fix it automatically for us. Can't tell you how much this has saved my life in so many situations. But model to fix. Now it is completely free, so it does take a little while, and to be fair, if there's like 10 other people doing it at the same time, you kind of see them in the list, and it even tells you what list in the line of the queue that you are. However, now it's uploading the model. Did it already get it? Repairing 100%. Dang, that was fast. It was a pretty tiny model. But now we can download that fixed model. Downloads. Sweet. And that's the file that you'll end up giving me if you would like it to be 3D printed. Now, I'm going to give an announcement, at least for our D3, and I'm going to set up just a Google Drive folder. Might as well make it a thing. So that way you can put any laser cuts you want cut or any 3D prints that you want to have. We can actually put those all together, right? However, in my case, let's take a look at what it produced. So downloads. And there it is. Right, really nothing different to it. However, if we were to put it back in Rhino and check the mesh, it would say good mesh. Again, I can't tell you exactly what it's fixing. What's nice is it does tell you exactly what it's fixing. So for instance, it said I had 2 planar holes and 8 naked edges. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of geometric terms that basically just mean we need to resolve the surface itself in order for it to be printed, right? Kind of a lot of jargon stuff that really doesn't pertain to you. But again, now you know how to produce an STL file, and you're well on your way to even talk to the Mega Lab and go, sir, I need this size file and everything. And he's going to ask you, the first thing he'll ask you, do you have your object or STL file? And you're good to go, just like that, right? What is that?
What is this website?
Formware. Right? Just look up free online STL repair. Good question. But before we go upstairs and go to the laser cutter, I want to save my file so that I can use it upstairs. And to be fair, I don't. Oh man, I forgot. I had to turn in my car yesterday. I remember can anybody tell me what I keep on my keys? Son of a bitch. When I don't have my car, I don't have my USB. It's okay. I'll email it to myself at least after this video. However, let's look at least how we should save it to go upstairs and laser cut it. So I definitely want to laser cut some tiny little scale figures at both scales. So I've already scaled them down there. To be fair, I have no idea where I put the other ones. I think it was over here. Yeah, there they are. But those are true size, right? Those are actually still 1-to-1. Again, we're working some large scales on this project. So I maybe actually want to make 2D already the ones that I have. So let's just do that because it's way easier. And why work harder when I can work smarter? Where'd they go? There they are. So yeah, I don't have to do that again, but I didn't get it quite so well, did it? So make 2D doesn't really work so well on a mesh. It's basically because it's a bunch of triangles. So let's take those again. Where's the one I made? There we go. The original. And I'll just scale this one to the ones that I already scaled. Woo. Fairly close. Scale that down. From there to there. Make it much smaller. Sweet. Dang, nailed that. Anyway. So there's the one that will actually laser cut. Because it is the actual size. And in this case, I don't have to do the conversion thing. I really can just do a 12 by 24. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, you can do it both ways. But at the end of the day, you should definitely know scale, right? That way we can get some pieces. Don't think we need those. Or at least get them out of the way. Get out of here. We're going to go ahead and make the 1/8 Professor Verrett. In fact, let's make 4 of them. Just in case one doesn't work. Now, in order for the laser cutter to work, these need to either be blue or red, and in order to cut, you need the color blue, right? So we'll take the entire piece. Usually I just like to make a layer and just call it cut, and we'll make it blue. However, it can't just be like any color blue there. It literally needs to be only the color blue, otherwise it just won't show up. The laser cutter is essentially a printer, but instead of printing ink, it prints lasers. Right? So we'll definitely go see how that is. And let's take the whole piece, right click, change object layer, and of course those should change to a blue layer. In this case, I kind of want to switch that to a black layer or a default layer. That way I know it's not going to accidentally cut anything or anything like that. Oh. My bad. Guess I accidentally duplicated it. But in order to take this onto the laser cutter, we're just going to take the whole piece. I'm going to file, export selected, and just save it as, honestly, anything. DWG, anything that'll open up in Rhino. So honestly, one of the easiest things to open up in Rhino is to file export and turn it into a Rhino 8 file. Now, nicely enough, there's now Rhino 8 on our laser cutter computer, so we're good. You can honestly save it as just about anything between DWG and Rhino 6, 7, or 8. So we'll put it on the desktop and we'll put it test laser cut today. And as soon as I find a USB, we can go do that. Thanks, Angelica. Otherwise, before I end this video, were there any questions about Illustrator, 3D modeling, anything? Thank you. Yes, Emily. Yeah, that's fine.
Using Illustrator for this section, and I was making the ground, the shape for the ground. I was wondering how I could like push it also around the support, the structure that goes underneath the ground.
Sure.
Like, I couldn't push it.
It's not a bad question. If I'm getting this right, what you're talking about is like this part.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is actually draw and hatch it first in Rhino. Don't draw anything in Illustrator, right? Again, that's just kind of one of my rules because it's way easier to do it in Rhino. For instance, in Rhino, this is all you do. Now listen up, because I know some of you guys had the exact same question. Emily just asked a question, how could I basically fill this in Illustrator? Now, the answer is don't do it in Illustrator. In fact, just hatch it here first, fill it in, and call it a day. Take that into Illustrator. In fact, you could even save or export this and just export this hatch piece if you want. That way you can add it to the existing lines that you've already got. However, if I did really want to do it in Illustrator, I do have a trick, but I don't recommend it. But let's say I needed to fill something in, right? Like you need to do in Illustrator. I would lock everything because the tool that I'm about to use will accidentally change the other layers, right? So in my case, I'd want to make a new layer and call it, I don't know, ground fill. I'd want to make sure that I'm only using that layer, right? So in order to enact that layer, of course, you can click on it, double click. And I think by default, as long as you have one highlighted, it basically selects that. But now I can use these lines as a guideline tool or like almost like a fill-in coloring book, right? I'll use the pen tool or the letter P. So if you type in the letter P, you'll see kind of the scribble pen tool. And you can still lock onto things, but to be fair, it's not the easiest tracing in the world. I can hold Shift and basically make my way downtown. That was a 1,000 miles joke, but nobody got it. That's okay. You know, making my way downtown, walking fast. I was like, I know you guys know it. But you can fill in something, right, Emily? To be fair, you can make whatever you want. But arguably that was way harder. It took way more clicks, and I could have just used hatch very easily. So great question. Much easier to fix in Rhino and just take that into Illustrator. Change the color.
If I take my drawing from Rhino to Illustrator and it's super big or like super small, is it easier to scale it in Illustrator or Rhino?
It doesn't really matter where you scale it, but you need to have the right dimensions. Now, if it's coming in too big into Illustrator, like how big? Are you saying like it's like way off into space? Then you probably did something wrong. Your lines just aren't the right size, or that rectangle that you initially started with needs to come and fit the artboard. Because remember, we calculated some of these rectangles based on the paper that we were going to use. So one of the first things I need to do in Illustrator is make sure it's a 36 by 50. What I scale it to in Rhino, I need to make sure it's a 36 by 50. So double check that. Yes, Ephraim.
Can you transfer something from Rhino to Illustrator? The lines kind of change, like they become squished or moved.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Are you sure you're not accidentally not holding shift when you should and you want it to be proportional? It doesn't automatically stay proportional when I size it. So all it would be is accidentally not holding shift, and yeah, it's going to get squished a little, even though you're following kind of more or less a diagonal path. You know what I'm saying? So it's a good question, but for instance, check this out. Like if I just select everything, again, another reason why not to draw in Illustrator. And I know Longoria and I are probably telling you conflicting things. He probably draws in Illustrator all day, even though it's highly inaccurate. But that's what happens when you get two different educations. Anyway, over the exact same thing. But in our case, if you check this out, if I just scale it, it looks like it's proportional, but it's not. In fact, I can squish it too much, and I can squish it this way too much. Now, if I hold shift the whole time, it will stay proportional.
But what happens if one of the curves, just one of them is like squished?
Then it just happened to one curve. Now, if I would double check Rhino and make sure that it's not squished in the first place. If it is, then just fix it in Rhino and take it into Illustrator. However, more than likely, this is what happens, Efren, is we accidentally think that we get everything in Illustrator and we accidentally forget a line or a curve that was in a wall or something, and we often accidentally scale them at different times. Again, another reason not to draw in Illustrator and only use Illustrator as what it does best.
But you can save it as an Illustrator file, right? And that should like, I don't know, like, and then when you open it in Illustrator, it's already an Illustrator file.
I would use DWG if it were me, but again, I'm sure you're getting told to save it as an AI file.
Yeah, because that's what I did, and
Doesn't always work,
I mean, it was just like my art.
which is why I don't recommend it.
Tiny, and then like my actual
Right.
huge
Right.
fungus.
Or it'll just go completely out and you can't even transform anything, like a poor Patty situation. Now, to be fair, I think it is actually her Rhino settings. But again, like I said, guys, sometimes Adobe Illustrator file works, sometimes it doesn't. Use DWG. At least for the love of God, try it. Don't just sit there and be like, hey, it's not working, right? I know that's not what any of you guys are doing, but I say it for the sake of recording because you guys aren't the only ones who listen to these things. Try switching it over again. Try DWG. If we're getting the same issues, then we can start to isolate and find the actual problem that it is. Definitely not a bad question. And I know a lot of us run into that one. Just trying to transfer things from Rhino into Illustrator and noticing, A, it's not even there, or that, we got to move the C-plane 0 point. B, it's way too big or way too small, those kinds of things. So you're definitely, you guys are in the clear, you're normal. That is definitely the learning curve. Great questions though. Anything else, guys? Nothing else? Alex is just like, just trying, just making it by, man. Fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. But yeah, I'll leave it there for today, and this will essentially wrap up at least the tutorial sessions of Studio Design 3. I will say it's been a very crash course, guys. Keep in mind that normally if you were taking my computer graphics, you'd kind of have 16 weeks to kind of really bake this out and really get some feedback of how to do something. So keep in mind we do have to do a little bit of a crash course because some of you guys are kind of avoiding computer graphics altogether. I get that. But in order to help you out in at least the next school, you will thank me. You will look back to this, these few weeks that you had of at least somebody trying to teach you some of the programs and be like, oh God, he was right. Nobody's going to teach us this. They really kind of expect us to already know some of these things. So anyway, best of luck. And obviously we'll use Friday to obviously still work in here. But I won't necessarily do a tutorial. So we'll leave it at that for today.